You can now hear Movie Heaven, Movie Hell on Stitcher. Stitcher is radio on demand. Listen anytime, anywhere. Stitcher is an award-winning free app that lets you listen to all your favourite shows, plus discover from 20,000 news, entertainment and sports shows. You can also create your own custom playlists. Stitcher is available on iOS, Android, Nook, iPad and in over 4 million car dashboards. You can stream your favourite podcasts from Stitcher. Don't have Stitcher? Download it free today at Stitcher.com or in the App Store. And please leave us a review and rating on Stitcher. Thank you. Welcome to Movie Heaven, Movie Hell with me, Simon Aitken, and
I'm Keith Eyles, and we are both independent filmmakers that enjoy talking about movies and related topics. And for this podcast special, we are very happy to welcome back a returning guest of ours, Skyping in from the Star Trek 50 celebration in Las Vegas. We have filmmaker Charles de Lauzirika. So welcome back to the show, Charles, and it's great to have you involved in this.
Thanks for having me back, and I apologize in advance if I'm a little low energy today, being it's been a pretty fun but brutal last few days here in Las Vegas with all the Trek mania and all the craziness here.
No worries.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we're here. We're doing 3 podcasts to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, and in a weird way, we're going to start off backwards. So we're going to start talking about the Star Trek reboot, parts 11 to 13, also known as the Kelvin films.
The Kelvinverse, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. No, absolutely. I mean, Star Trek is another big influence growing up, and one that's got, there's a lot to talk about. So to kick things off with our guest and hopefully wake you up a bit, Charles, over there in Vegas, could you start by maybe sort of telling us how you first discovered Star Trek and how you got into it?
Well, it's interesting because most people I know got into Star Trek either through the original series or the Next Generation. And I'm at a certain age where I got in actually through the animated series. So I was kind of in between the 2 big milestones in Trek there. And I really enjoyed the animated series quite a bit because unlike the rest of sort of the cartoons that were on TV at the time, it was serious and it was smart and strangely creepy and kind of I don't know, mysterious in some ways, but also kind of simple and easy to follow as a kid. So I enjoyed the visuals of it, even though those visuals were relatively simple and there was a lot of reused cells and things. But I didn't care about that as a kid. I only cared about this sort of interesting sort of family of characters that would go on these exotic adventures. But then around the same time, I started to notice in Los Angeles on this station, KCOP, which is Channel 13, they would be showing reruns of the original series. And that's when I kind of, as a kid, I don't know if I was like 5 or 6 or whatever, but as a kid, I kind of like connected, oh, that's the same thing. That's the same world, but in live action. So I slowly kind of got into the original series that way. But I got to say, I even then, it was around the same time that Star Wars hit, and it was a few years later after that anyway, Star Wars hit, and that completely rocked my world, and I became a full-blown Star Wars fanatic. And it really wasn't until 87 and the Next Generation that I kind of got back into Star Trek. I kind of fell back in love with it just because it was, it was a weekly series, and you got to know these characters over 7 seasons, and it was a really, I think, golden age of science fiction and film and television. So it was easy to get back into Trek after those first 2 kind of like samplings of that universe when I was a kid.
No, that's kind of interesting. I mean, for me, I always say that with all the sort of big influences when I was a kid, I was a second generation Star Trek and James Bond fan, and like a first generation Star Wars and Indiana Jones fan, because and obviously all the superhero stuff, that's a bit different because they already had a life in comic books and film serials and stuff. But obviously Star Trek had started in the sort of decade before I was born, and when I first saw it, in fact, my first glimpses of it probably were the animated series, actually. But I actually really got into Star Trek through the movies. So I always say that I'm a fan of Star Trek from the movie series more than the original television series, because what they did here in the UK is as I'm sure they good marketing. Once the Star Trek the motion picture had come out, which was obviously only a couple of years after Star Wars, they then re-released and played reruns all the time of the original series, and I kind of then sort of caught up with that stuff whilst watching the movie releases initially on VHS, and then started going to see them at the cinema, etc. So very, very fond of it indeed. How about you, Simon?
The first Star Trek I saw was the motion picture at the cinema, but I was so young that I don't remember it. I only know because my parents told me a story that they had to leave halfway through because I started crying. So that was my first experience of Star Trek. But I was then sort of years later taken by my cousin to see Star Trek 2. And I'm not quite sure. I think at the time it certainly was a 15 on VHS, but I don't know if it was a similar rating at the cinema. But I remember seeing that at the cinema, and I was sort of blown away by that. And then watching the original series on BBC Two on like a weekday evening around 6 o'clock. I would sort of rush back from school and sit down and watch the original Trek. The first episode I remember seeing was the one with what looked like those pizza creatures that would drop down.
Oh, the Devil in the Dark. Yes, the Horter, I think. Was it basically a man under the carpet that was walking around?
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah, you're thinking of those kind of nasty looking pizza creatures that would drop from the ceiling and land on your back and get you, right? I mean, I remember that scared the hell out of me as a kid, that episode.
I think I remember that one. I've remembered, is it the City on the Edge of Tomorrow?
The one City on the Edge of Forever. Yeah.
Oh, Forever.
Yeah.
Okay, and I remember that one. And then of course all the rest of the original series films came out, and then of course 87 Next Generation came out, and I first saw that on VHS, and then it was on BBC Two, and I would watch that, and then I would watch Deep Space Nine, where I have to say that was when my love for Trek really hit its peak, was during the Deep Space Nine era, and then with Voyager, and then it kind of petered out with Enterprise. Mm-hmm. But I've more or less seen all the films at the cinema, including 5.
By the way, I just want to clarify my own stories. Like, I skipped over the movies because I was focusing on the TV. But the movies, I definitely, since I was more into movies and television anyway, I really loved the movies. Beginning with the motion picture, I think the motion picture still to this day is a majestic, beautiful, smart, epic film. And I know people love to point out its flaws. They call it a motionless picture or whatever they call it. But I find beauty in that kind of languid pace, in the same way that 2001, which is, far more of an art film than Star Trek the motion picture. But there is a kind of a sense of wonder and discovery to that first Star Trek film that the others don't really seem to be interested in, which is fine, because like Star Trek 2, I think is a really powerful, passionate, fun kind of yarn of a film. I mean, I think that Nicholas Meyer wanted to make a kind of a nautical adventure that explored themes of mortality and friendship and growing old, and I thought that was pretty bold for what was otherwise a popcorn, summer movie in the summer of '82, which of course is still probably the greatest movie summer ever for all the other films that came out that year. But I really did enjoy pretty much most of the Star Trek films until 5. And just a funny side story on Star Trek 5. I got to go to a test screening of it on the Paramount lot early when the visual effects were really rougher than they are even in their final state. And you could tell the audience did not enjoy that film in particular. And afterwards, in the street outside this theater on the Paramount lot, William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy was out there as well, but William Shatner was there surrounded by presumably Paramount executives, and some of the fans on the screen had gone up to Shatner to ask for his autograph or just to say hi, and I happened to be pretty close when this angry fan came up to Shatner and said, how many more of these are you going to make? Like really angrily. And Shatner, without missing a beat, said about 1.5. And he was joking, but it turned out he was exactly right. He made 1.5 more Star Trek.
Absolutely, yeah. That's good. I mean, I'm really pleased to hear you not rag on Star Trek the motion picture, actually, because 2 and 3 I saw it on VHS. But to be fair, yes, my dad did actually take me to see Star Trek the motion picture when I was very young. I remember Mum was the one who took me to see Star Wars and Superman, and Dad took me to see Star Trek and Flash Gordon. And I still, to this day maintain, because I was, as a young child, I was absolutely blown away by that scene with the wonderful score by Jerry Goldsmith, where Scotty and Kirk take the shuttle out to go around the new refitted Enterprise, and I still think that even today that really holds up and looks great. So I do have kind of a special place for all the Star Trek movies, including the motion picture, which I know a lot of people don't agree with. So yeah.
Well, I think there's a new appreciation of it in recent years, because I think maybe a lot of the old school fans of Star Trek are having to deal with sort of the new rebooted JJ verse Star Trek, which is more about fun and pyrotechnics and excitement, and certainly I think they have strong character elements in those films, but it's definitely more of a rock and roll sensibility than the original Trek films or series or books or anything else in Star Trek previous to the 2009 film. Going back to the motion picture is a way of saying that's kind of where we went astray, even though there are several films after the motion picture which I think are really good. That was probably the last time there was a true sort of heady, thoughtful, philosophical Star Trek film, which, by the way, also is beautifully crafted. The visual effects are astounding. The score is probably one of Goldsmith's best. I think it's easy to go back and love the motion picture when you just kind of think about it for a bit.
Well, I don't know whether you guys found this, but what I found when I was at school, when it used to really anger me as a kid, I was always passionate about this stuff, even as a youngster. But we always had these sort of two camps of Star Trek versus Star Wars, and you either were really into Star Wars or you were really into Star Trek, and it was like you couldn't be into both of them. And I used to get really annoyed about that, because I used to think, well, apart from them being science fiction and dealing with interplanetary travel and alien life forms, that's the only similarity. You've got obviously Star Trek in our galaxy, in our future, in a very utopian future. You've got Star Wars in a galaxy far, far away, a long time ago, with a war going on. Star Trek obviously dealt with things like time travel and alternate realities and discovery, whereas, Star Wars, you had this spiritual force and good versus evil and all that sort of thing. So for me personally, I always thought there was plenty of room, have plenty of love for both, but it did used to annoy me when they used to have comparisons, and in the schoolyard, you weren't cool if you were watching Star Trek if you were one of the Star Wars kids and stuff. I don't know whether that it was like that in the US or whether you experienced anything like that, Simon. But definitely when I was growing up, it seemed that you're either into one or the other, which I didn't agree with.
Sounds reminds me of like when the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were out, that people were said, oh, you could only be a Beatles fan or a Rolling Stones fan. And yet I don't think they actually knew that the two bands were actually good friends and actually wrote music for each other. So I'm kind of with you on that, Keith, where, I don't see a difference between the two. And I guess I was lucky at the schools that I went to because there was none of that. But I think because mostly people were Star Wars fans, but I don't ever remember there being arguments about which was better, Star Trek or Star Wars, because all of us would sort of run home at the end of the day to watch Star Trek. So no, I didn't experience that.
We definitely, I experienced that a bit out here, but I didn't really particularly take one side or the other. I mean, I was definitely more of a Star Wars fan because, Star Trek had been around for such a long time. I mean, it was before I was born that it began. And I kind of grew up with it always as this thing that was kind of on TV. It wasn't a big hit. There's only 3 seasons. And even then it was because of a letter writing campaign. It just had that feel of like something that was very cult, It wasn't until later that I think Star Trek really exploded into the mainstream. Whereas Star Wars just came out of nowhere. Like that was like a lightning bolt that just surprised everybody. And so I think it was easier to be, wowed by the Star Wars phenomenon because it came from nowhere and it was everywhere when it did hit, Star Trek kind of crept along for a while until it found, I think, more of a pop culture footing. But as a kid, I loved them both. I was definitely, again, more of a Star Wars kid, but I never ever, argued over which was supposedly better. I think there were 2 different things, and it was easy to love them both, I thought.
Yeah. Well, I used to sort of find that, because they sort of, in terms of the original Star Wars trilogy, you kind of had a Star Trek movie in the year between each of the trilogy, each of that trilogy. So
Yeah.
I sort of found that, I was happy all round because, I'd be really into Star Wars when all that stuff was out, and then the next year, I'd be really into Star Trek, but knowing that I had more Star Wars to look forward to, and vice versa. So really important stuff. But I didn't have a life as a kid either, obviously.
Well, I think that's a good place to sort of lead into talking about the sort of J.J. Abrams Star Treks, because at the end of the day, they seem to be a amalgamation of the two, of Star Wars and Star Trek.
That's true.
Do you want to start, Charles, on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, it was obvious after Nemesis that Star Trek needed an adrenaline shot to the heart, like the scene in Pulp Fiction, to save it. And that adrenaline shot was J.J. Abrams and his take on it. And, I could see why some Star Trek purists might be allergic to his, what he had to do to save Star Trek. But I feel like what he did was exactly what was needed. And there's decades worth of old original Star Trek still there if that's what you prefer. But I think at this point in time, it makes sense to make it a little bit more mainstream, a little bit more accessible to people who aren't Star Trek fans, because Star Trek fans, I think, will turn out for Star Trek no matter what it is, no matter what flavor it is or what iteration it is. They'll always be there for Star Trek because they're passionate and loyal and they care. In just the economic and financial sort of situation in the film industry, I mean, you have to really kind of go big or go home with movies these days, which is sad, but you kind of have to make these $200 million movies that then go on to make $1 billion. I mean, that seems to be the formula for so many big movies these days. And for Star Trek to survive in that environment, it kind of had to step up to that type of filmmaking, whether you like it or not. And I think that first 2009 film did a really solid job of bringing Star Trek forward for a new generation. And for people who maybe used to think Star Trek was kind of nerdy and not for them, and kind of like filed it away with Doctor Who and other kind of geekier things, and it showed those people in the mainstream that Star Trek could be for them. And that broadened the audience. And then maybe that convinced them or gave them the courage to go back and watch original Star Trek, which I think is great if that was the case. But then it's sort of like, well, how far do you chase that adrenaline of the new Star Trek films? And I think that, I think it's been sort of hit and miss since with Into Darkness and Beyond. And I think, Beyond is certainly a step up from Into Darkness. I think it's gotten back to sort of the pure fun and joy of the Star Trek universe. And I think, the one thing the first film did so well, the first J.J. Abrams film did so well, was establish this cast. I don't mean establish the characters because we've known the actors for a long time, but to fill those shoes with new actors, basically, that's a pretty daunting task. And I think they handle that extremely well in that first film, like putting together a new family for those roles.
I have to say, when I saw the first one, I was kind of disappointed, and it didn't kind of. I remember coming out of that screening thinking it was all right, but I think just thinking about it now, I think one of the reasons why I was kind of disappointed because I knew that them going back to the original series meant that we weren't going to get the Deep Space Nine film or the Voyager film, and to me that seemed to be a bit of a loss because I was certainly a big Deep Space Nine fan, and it was from the point of view that we actually saw a war that takes place within the Federation, and I would have loved to seen that up on the big screen. Voyager, maybe not so much. I mean, Voyager was lost in space for Star Trek, and they made their way home, and so that was their journey complete. But I did feel kind of cheated that we didn't get like the Deep Space Nine movie because that's how it looked like the series was going to go. We were going to get, we had the original series, we had the Next Generation, and then Deep Space Nine. But unfortunately, I think Nemesis was kind of like the nail in the head of that coffin.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm slightly different to you there, Simon, in so much as when I went to see the Star Trek reboot in 2009, I just had a massive ear-to-ear grin for the entire thing. I mean, I went with my good friend Tyrone. We saw it on like one of the first screenings at the IMAX. It was right before going to Cannes, actually. And what I loved about it, because I was worried, I was kind of, as a Star Trek fan of all of it, the movies, and the various television series, I was kind of, slightly skeptical and slightly worried. And but I just thought it was very clever, because what I thought was very good is they managed to make it kind of a prequel and an origin story for these characters, but at the same time it was sort of a sequel to both what they'd set up in Enterprise and obviously a sequel to things that came after Nemesis as well. But then they managed to make it a reboot of everything, as and make it fresh, and obviously because of using Nimoy in it as Spock Prime, and rather than him just having like a sort of stupid little cameo or something, actually having his character as a proper part and as the bridge between it there, I felt that one of the things they did was they were able to do this without upsetting the hardcore Star Trek fans, because suddenly, continuity and whether the ship looks slightly different or the technology was slightly different, and all of that sort of stuff made sense. I mean, it did absolutely overwrite, apart from Enterprise, it's going to, of course, overwrite everything going on. It's a bit like they've done with the whole sort of X-Men franchise now after Days of Future Past. But I just thought it was a really creatively imaginative way to handle it and still be respectful to the to the original as well. And I was really happy with everything about it. And I also like the fact that they always used the 60s original series as the template when it came to all of the design, even though everything was very much updated. They were all still wearing the similar uniforms and similar phases and similar things right the way along, but at the same time making it fresh. And of course, they'd been very imaginative with the casting as well. So yeah, I was really happy with it.
Well, I have to say though, I did go back. I bought it on Blu-ray, and I think I enjoyed it a lot more on the second viewing, and I enjoy it a lot more now every time I watch it. And I have to say, the opening sequence where you see Kirk being born in battle, I think is very effective. And I have to say, I kind of tear up every time I see that sequence now. And it's kind of weird though, because the film never kind of reaches that height that it does within those first 10 minutes. Those first 10 minutes of Star Trek 2009 is really well done.
Yeah, that's true. I agree. I actually, my girlfriend hadn't seen any of Star Trek until recently. I mean, like nothing. And I think, again, like many people, she was sort of afraid to get into it because it might have seemed too geeky or maybe not her thing. But we knew we were going to go to Comic-Con, and we knew that we'd probably be going to the Star Trek Beyond premiere that was there. So I thought it was important she at least see the first J.J. Abrams movie, the 2009 film. And I think she kind of sat there. And by the way, she's here in the hotel room with me, so she might yell at me from across the room. But, I think she kind of sat there thinking, okay, here's Star Trek. Let's see what this is about. And then that opening scene, she was in tears, like within minutes. And frankly, I was too. Again, it's like I had seen that scene, the film, like maybe 4 or 5 times, and even now, I see that opening just gets me, and it immediately hooks you into that situation, that world, and it kind of clears away, I think, any concerns or hesitation you might have about this new timeline, and I do think it was smart to sort of come up with this way to start a new kind of a new timeline, a new kind of like have it splinter off and become its own thing. Sadly, I think that was squandered a bit into darkness by going right back to Khan and kind of going right back into that, kind of like almost like the timeline is trying to bend itself back into the original timeline. I kind of wish they had just gone off on a completely different direction, which I think Beyond tried to course correct to some degree.
I have to say though, watching all 3 films, I have noticed that they do seem to are kind of following the same thread as the original Star Trek movies, and I'll explain. So the first one, there's a threat against Earth, like in the motion picture, even though it's not V'Ger. The second one, it's Khan. And in the third one, the Enterprise is destroyed. So, and now I hear that the fourth one's possibly got something to do with time travel. And the thing I loved about the first film was, as you say, they did a separate timeline, and it did make it look like, you know what, guys? We're going to do our own thing. There's the original Trek. We haven't, it's still there. And now we're going to go off and do our own thing. And then they go and remake Wrath of Khan. Yeah. And it's just like, oh.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, for me, I loved Star Trek 2009, as I've already said. I'm sure we'll get into it. I had loads of issues with Star Trek Into Darkness, which I'm sure we'll move on to shortly. But I felt really inspired again after watching Star Trek Beyond, which I was really happy with. But one of the things, again, I mean, that opening, resetting the timeline with Nero coming back and Kirk's birth and all that. I mean, yeah, that is so wonderfully done. Chris Hemsworth, who knew what he was going to go on to become, is George Kirk. That was all nicely covered and putting the Kelvin in there. And, again, I have to take hat off to Michael Giacchino for the score at that point, because, one of the things I was quite worried about was, a bit like I always associate, of course, John Williams with Star Wars and John Barry with Bond. And it always, for me, either been James Horner or Jerry Goldsmith for Star Trek. And, I was kind of worried, is the music going to be any good? And like everything else about the film, he took it in a slightly different direction. Okay, you had the little Alexander Courage bit that they all take from the original series, but he took it in another direction and made it really fresh and really work and really emotional, particularly in that particular scene. And the other thing, where you correctly mentioned the sort of melding of the Star Wars and Star Trek sensibilities into these films. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but one of the sequences that I really loved, which was the free fall sequence leading to the drilling rig fight. And that always kind of, the energy in that fight always kind of reminded me of the skiff fight above the Salak pit in Return of the Jedi. I don't know whether you felt that. I felt it had a very similar kind of energy and feel to it, and you could sort of certainly see how J.J. Abrams had been inspired, more by Star Wars, by his own admission, than anything that had come before with Star Trek.
Well, I don't know if I saw it as the skiff battle. I don't remember anybody sort of giving the signal to R2-D2 and then lots of nodding.
No. That's not what I mean. I mean the action.
I'm just saying, because I love that Family Guy joke where they do the whole thing where they're nodding and it just goes on and it goes on and it goes on. So every time I think about the battle over the Sarlacc pit now, I always think of that sketch from Family Guy.
Family Guy's ruined it for you. There you go. They loved it.
Or improved it some ways. But
no, I just mean the energy of the fight and the cutting and the way it was kind of shot reminded me of when it all kicks off, after Luke's jumped off of the the platform and sprung in the air and captured the lightsaber, and it all kicks off and goes chaotic. I just kind of felt that it just, for me, how some things sort of sometimes remind you of something. I just felt it had a similar kind of energy, and I sort of thought, JJ's kind of trying to bring that rock and roll, as you put it, Charles, to Star Trek, which is normally classical music, Well,
it's interesting though. I do agree with the skiff battle notion, because if you look at the color palette of that scene, the kind of like the brown rust, kind of structure that they're on, the drilling, platform, very similar to the skiff and Jabba's sail barge. That the fact they're over, it's broad daylight, they're over a desert planet with a giant hole under them that they're all worried about falling down into. It is similar to the Sarlacc pit and that skiff battle. I think it's just, it's amplified, by 100 in many ways. But yeah, I definitely think that's a little bit of Star Wars flavoring. That's what I would say. It's like Star Trek. It's still Star Trek, but it has Star Wars flavor in it now. Just a little bit of ingredients, little spices here and there that feel Star Warsy.
While we're on this, what do we think? Should we talk about? It's probably the next good thing to talk about is the actual cast and the casting on this. I mean, what do you guys feel about the ensemble of the 7 characters that they've reimagined for this timeline?
I mean, personally, I think it's spot on all 7 of them, and even like Captain Pike as well. I mean, I just think the casting in that first JJ Star Trek film is phenomenal. I think each one of those actors inhabits the existing roles as we know them, but then develops them in different ways or gives them a bit of their own life. Because I mean, Chris Pine is not imitating William Shatner, yet no. he's still clearly Kirk. Mm-hmm. So I think that was that's a daunting task. I think with these iconic roles that we've known for all these years. With actors who are, completely, identified with those characters. I mean, same with like Zachary Quinto, taking over as Spock. I mean, how dare you try to replace Leonard Nimoy? But it was good to have Leonard Nimoy in the film to pass the baton. And I can't think of a single actor in that film that didn't deliver the goods and then even take it further. I mean, I think Karl Urban to me is my favorite of all the new cast in terms of how. He definitely embodies a DeForest Kelley style, kind of attitude towards things. And yet it's still clearly Karl Urban, and he's taken it in his own direction now. And I thought he was wonderful and beyond. I mean, that was probably maybe my favorite of the 3 films in terms of the bones component. But I have zero negative to say about the casting of the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies.
Simon?
I have to say, though, he has one cringe moment line in the original Star Trek where he's talking about his wife's taking everything in the divorce and all I've got is my bones. And I did kind of went, oh dear. But thankfully that was the only line that made me groan.
Well, actually, it's funny you say that, because I thought that line was actually genius, and I was surprised when I listened to the commentary on it that was never in the script. That was an ad lib by Karl Urban on the day.
Oh, okay.
But I thought, how could that have not been scripted? Because, you know, Kirk had always called McCoy Bones, and we never really knew why exactly. You know, that was always his name. And I just thought, as this was an origin story, and this is where they met, and yeah, I just thought it's interesting. I disagree with you on that. I actually thought that was a stroke of genius, but it was an ad lib. As I said, it wasn't in the script. That was something that Carl Urban brought to it, and it really worked. But what did you think, Simon, of the rest of the casting?
No, I agree with both of you that the casting is spot on. I mean, they did a really good job, and every actor sort of filled the role perfectly, and they are a great substitute for the original crew.
Yeah, no, I agree as well. I mean, when I first saw them, you know, before actually seeing the film, you see all the publicity pictures and whatever. I was a little bit worried because, of course, you know, me being the total geek, as I wanted to actually buy that these were all younger versions of the characters that you know that we love, and obviously, you know, thankfully they'd cast it, they'd kept the ethnicities the same, and the sort of physical types kind of similar and whatever. But yeah, I was so happy when I actually saw the film because you know, I agree with you. Chris Pine, thankfully, he doesn't try and sort of imitate William Shatner's cadence or anything like that. He makes sort of Kirk his own, but at the same time, he definitely has the spirit of the character. You know, same with Quinto. You know, when you look at Carl Urban, he really, you know, doesn't look anything like DeForest Kelley, really, but he does do kind of an impression of him in some ways, I suppose, but he totally captures it. He's got the voice, and he's got the mannerisms down completely. Zoe Saldana, obviously gorgeous. She kind of makes it her own a little bit, as does John Cho with Sulu. They work. They kind of make it their own, but it totally works, I think. And then, of course, sadly, you know, we've got the now late Anton Yelchin, which is terribly tragic and absolutely awful. But he, you know, again, didn't really look anything like Walter Koenig, but you know, did a really good and convincing and massively humorous, you know, impression. And you know, was there, I know, for quite a bit of comic relief, but it totally worked. And then, of course, Simon Pegg, you know, I do kind of look at him as just being Simon Pegg with slightly darker hair, putting on a Scottish accent. But, you know, in the spirit of it all, particularly with him being such a Star Trek fan himself, I mean, I had a little bit of a reservation with that initially, but I've got used to it now, and I really like it. And I support exactly what you said, Charles, as well. I think Bruce Greenwood filling Jeffrey Hunter's, you know, shoes as Captain Pike worked perfectly. I totally bought that in every way, shape, and form. And you know, just believed that he was on a different journey since the new timeline. But yeah, I loved it. I was happy, and of course, you know, I think as well, Eric Bana, who playing the original a new character to the story, but did a great job also as Nero.
Yeah, I have to say though that I think the one problem these films have is that the villains haven't been that great. Nero just seems to... I know Nero's got a very good reason to be pissed off, but he is just, I'm going to just destroy everything. And then you've got Khan, who's pissed off because, you know, his people are, you know, popsicles, so he's going to destroy everything. And then you've got Krull, who's pissed off and wants to destroy everything, and all the villains just seem to be people who just are pissed off and want to destroy everything.
Well, you know, it's funny because it almost reminds me of Aliens following Alien, in that once people had a taste of Aliens, that's kind of all they wanted, and it seems like, you know, the films that followed in varying degrees were trying to get back to that thrill ride of Aliens, and in this case, it's the Wrath of Khan. It's like everyone, not everyone, but like a lot of the filmmakers, all the probably studio decisions are all about chasing who's the next Khan. You know, what villain can we use to top Khan? And they've never even come remotely close, because Khan had a history with Kirk that predated the films. And plus Ricardo Montalban was a unique, singular persona on screen. I mean, the man was, charisma, at times a million. And just having him walk into a scene, I mean, he chewed the scenery like a Bond villain would, but I've not seen any villain since that even comes close, as much as they've had amazingly talented actors, and they've even had some interesting ideas as to why they're the villain. But, I don't think you need a supervillain in every Star Trek movie. That was what was so great about the motion picture. And by the way, that's what was so great about The Voyage Home, which until the 2009 film was the highest grossing Star Trek film. So I think that, you don't always need that baddie. And it'd be good to find a new challenge for this crew that doesn't involve some guy who has a grudge and is now going to come up with some master plan to wipe out everybody. But it seems like that's the more common, easier math to figure out when you're coming up with these films. I mean, it'll be interesting if the next film is indeed a time travel film, because I know that George Kirk is going to be somehow coming back. If maybe it's not a villain, maybe it's some sort of rift in time or something like that. But I doubt it. I bet there will be a supervillain of some kind, and he's probably using probably it'll be like the new version of Sauron from Generations. It'll be like some guy who's altering, time and space to maybe is going to be less of a vengeance thing and more of trying to make his life whole situation. I don't know, but I do think that we can probably see another supervillain, regardless of what's what it could be.
Yeah.
A great episode to use from Next Generation as a film idea is Yesterday's Enterprise, because I went back and I watched that recently, and the whole idea of this one event changing everything, I think that would be something interesting to investigate. I know that the whole series is kind of like that, the fact that that Dreadnought came back in time, that Nero came back in time and changed the whole timeline, but it would be interesting to sort of see that kind of ripple effect.
Yeah, I mean, Archie and Kurtzman, who obviously wrote Star Trek 2009, they absolutely cite Yesterday's Enterprise as one of the influences in using that sort of predestination paradox or whatever as the time travel vehicle for creating this new timeline. Just as a really quick aside, on a note of that, I'm glad you mentioned it, Simon, because for me, Star Trek The Next Generation, if I'm honest, I always did watch it, but I wasn't, when I saw especially the first season, I really wasn't that much of a fan. I was always a fan of, Kirk and the original crew, and it took me a long time to sort of warm to the new characters. And Yesterday's Enterprise, and then shortly followed by Best of Both Worlds in that season 3, was those were the two sort of key turning point episodes for me that got me suddenly really interested in Star Trek: The Next Generation and that crew. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it is an awesome episode.
Well, just continuing that aside, I always found with the sort of Next Generation kind of era series, so Deep Space Nine and Voyager, was that it seemed to take two series to kind of find its footing, and then by the third series they got it, and then from there on those series were really good. And it kind of started with Next Generation, and then Deep Space Nine, funnily enough, followed the same kind of route, because
it did, yeah.
Because they were just a space station where people would drop by, and it wasn't until like the third series when they got into the Dominion War, and same with Voyager. It wasn't until kind of 7 and 9 turned up that and the sort of being in kind of Borg space that series got interesting.
Yeah, we all got interested when 7 of 9 joined, obviously. I agree. They did take a while to get going, and sadly, I mean, I know you said at the beginning you weren't a fan. I'm probably one of the only people, but I was actually a fan of Voyager, but also a big fan of Enterprise, in fact, which again struggled, I think, on its first couple of seasons. But when they got into the sort of Xindi War in the third season, and definitely the fourth season, where they started to sort of bring some elements from the original series in it, I was really into it and really sad that it got cancelled, actually. And I always find that the irony of all this is that this whole reboot has literally written over everything with the exception of Enterprise. And I do like the fact that Admiral Archer gets a mention by Scotty. I was really happy about that.
Is that Admiral Archer's beagle in the background?
Barking? Yeah, there you go. Right on cue. It's Porthos, right, or Porthos offspring, or whatever it's supposed to be by then. Right on cue.
Well, that's actually a Chihuahua, but I mean,
it could be a prize beagle, right?
Completely agree. I mean, I'll never forget season 3 of Next Generation. It just automatically felt better. Even like the slight changes in the uniforms and things like that. You know, Worf going from red shirt to gold shirt. I mean, things like that. It just felt like, okay, they're gonna play with things. They're gonna, maybe just move things in a different direction. But then, after yesterday's Enterprise, which is of course one of the greatest Star Trek episodes ever of all the series, that first part of Best of Both Worlds was mind blowing. I mean, I'll never forget Riker saying fire and then cut to be continued and just like screaming at the television, I think we have to wait, several months before it comes back. But I remember all my friends who were watching it, and even those who weren't, quote unquote Trekkies, just blown away by that episode. And it's funny, I actually got to visit the set of Best of Both Worlds Part 1.
What?
I just happened to be on the Paramount lot with a friend of mine, and they were shooting the scene. It was with, it was definitely Brent Spiner, and it might have been, I forget her name, the actress, Brian Dennehy's daughter.
Elizabeth Dennehy. Yeah, she was playing Commander Shelby. Yeah. In that episode,
they were like on a ridge on this alien planet, and I remember one of the prop people, or actually it was the director telling Brent Spiner like a piece of the tricorder was a scanner, and I think and Brent Spiner thought it was a phaser, and they had a minor. It was very minor. It was almost like a humorous disagreement over it, but it was just funny to hear them like even then by season 3 they hadn't quite figured out what the pieces were of the props. Even though yes, it was a scanner and Brent Spiner was wrong, I think he was still thinking anything approximately that size was a phaser. So
that's interesting because obviously David Carson, who directed that episode, he ended up going on to direct because he did quite a number of the episodes and I think some of the pilots and whatever. Ended up going on to direct the Star Trek Generations film. So,
which, by the way, I'm sure we'll get into that as well. But that I think is a misunderstood gem of a film. I really love Generations. I know a lot of people hate it, but I really love that movie.
Yeah, it was just silly things about that bothered me. Like it was a bit of a mess with regards to you've mentioned about the uniforms and uniforms changing and stuff. And of course, Trek has always liked to change its uniforms and give the costume designers new stuff to do. That's always been part of it. But in that one, it was kind of a mix up between that and Deep Space Nine / Voyager type uniforms. And, so there were little annoying things. But I agree with you. The film itself, gets quite slagged off. But yeah, I enjoy all of them to a certain degree. What can I say? I enjoy Star Trek.
I mean, Generation certainly has some major plot holes that you can drive a truck through, but things like the costumes, the mixing and matching of costumes, I actually kind of like, because usually in Star Trek, the costumes change. For the entirety of Starfleet, they change off screen between seasons or between movies. It's like you go from the motion picture with these, kind of like cream colored or kind of like soft colored, leisure suits as they call them, and then the next movie, boom, like this, burgundy militaristic, or nautical looking, uniforms, with no evolution in between. Whereas at least here, it was kind of like, oh, okay, so maybe somewhere along the line, Starfleet put out the word, okay, we're distributing new uniforms, and like that, and we caught them in a period of time where the uniforms are being distributed. That's why you're getting the mixing and matching of uniforms. I kind of liked that sense of transition.
And it kind of makes it a bigger universe as well, doesn't it? Which kind of works.
Yeah, and the film itself is a transition, so why not?
I mean, I also love the fact that Admiral Pike is wearing, Admiral D. Kirk's uniform in the reboot. I love that.
It's pretty close at the end. Yeah, when he's in the wheelchair, it's like that was pretty nice.
Yeah. I mean, I think is it Michael Kaplan who's JJ's costume designer, who he tends to use on these things.
Yeah.
He definitely did a good job of sort of, I think JJ's mandate was something like always go back to the the original crew and the original series for this design stuff, and I quite like that in the fact that the uniforms, they were their own thing because of this new timeline, but at the same time that they followed very closely what we'd seen on screen as well, and I thought that all worked rather nicely, actually. Yeah.
As you said, Keith, that when you saw Star Trek Into Darkness, you had a few problems with it, and I know because I was there with you watching it. So what were your problems with it?
Well, I mean, it had enjoyable bits. So let me start by saying, I didn't think the whole thing was terrible. It was an entertaining film, and there were elements of it that I liked and a few nods and winks that were good. But the thing that really bothered me the most was the fact that they'd established this new timeline in the previous film. They'd done it respectfully, so it hadn't sort of said that everything else was crap, but they could now basically go wherever they wanted. And I thought, why did they go back there? Because, Wrath of Khan is such an important film in the Trek canon for me. As Charles is absolutely rightly said, Ricardo Montalban, whether it was in Space Seed, the original episode, or indeed that film, massively charismatic and an important character. And don't get me wrong, I love Benedict Cumberbatch as an actor. I'm a massive Sherlock fan. I think he's great, but to me, he was not right to play Khan. I mean, we talked about what a good job they've done with the casting in Star Trek 2009, with getting people who bring their individuality, but at the same time, you can kind of buy those characters, right? Benedict Cumberbatch, fantastic actor, but do I buy that he's Ricardo Montalban from Space Seed? Not at all. He looks nothing like him. He sounds nothing like him, and I just was like, why did they go there? Why did they do that? And then the other thing that really wound me up big time was when we get towards the end of the film and they sort of start reversing the roles of Spock and Kirk, with the whole saving the ship in the reactor and Kirk dying, even though of course we already know he's going to live because of this super blood, so nobody's faces mortality anymore, which is another problem with it. But the fact that they did that scene in Wrath of Khan, Kirk and Spock had been friends for over 20 years, and it was really emotional, and they had that. Whereas in this film, even though it was made 2 or 3 years later, was actually only set less than a year after the Star Trek 2009. In terms of the timeline, it's still set in 2259. Right, so Kirk and Spock had only known each other a year, and most of that they haven't actually got on. They've not got on at all. So again, I didn't feel that they'd earned that emotional scene at the glass door of the reactor, and then when he goes Khan, and he kind of all of that stuff, and I just thought, why did they go there? Why couldn't they have just used Benedict Cumberbatch, have him play another character? And go on another adventure and have all this stuff. I mean, I didn't mind Carol Marcus being introduced into the film. That didn't bother me. And they talked about Section 31, and you had Peter Weller, in it, and there were some good set pieces and whatever. But a lot of it, a lot of the beats, the way the film ends is practically the same as the way the first film ended, almost like shot for shot. And I was really disappointed with Into Darkness. So yes, I had my issues, and that's my rant over about that. On to you guys.
I largely agree with what you just said. I think it's a very beautifully crafted film. I think the cinematography and the visual effects are pretty tremendous. And as you mentioned earlier, Michael Kaplan, the costume designer, who also did Blade Runner, by the way, with Charles Node, really went to town with, like, it seems like And actually, the same was true with Beyond. I think that it was a different costume designer, but it's funny. It was almost like every day they have a different costume, or every room they walk into, they have a different costume. But it's kind of fun too to see like there's this kind of world of or every event and every meeting requires a different uniform of some kind. But on the whole, I agree. I think it was a mistake to go to Cannes so early and in the way they did, and a lot of it had to do with the way it got out in the press, ahead of time, and where everyone on the cast and crew basically they had to straight up lie to everyone to say like, no, it's not Cannes, it's John Harrison. And then, of course, when that scene when John Harrison is in the brig and Kirk and Spock are on the other side of the glass, and he's explaining who he is, and he's got this, Cumberbatch has this, really even-keeled, very menacing voice, but then when he says, "My name is," it's almost like he looks right into the camera when he says Khan, like you expect the audience to go, ooh, and I think at that point the audience was sort of like, we kind of knew that already, and now it's, it wasn't that interesting of a reveal, but I wish that they had gone in a completely different direction and not gone back to Khan so quickly. And also, so it was very complicated and not in a good way. It was kind of convoluted, actually, I think, in terms of the plan and putting his people in those, photon torpedoes, which makes no sense to me at all. Why would you put people you loved in potentially, dangerous weaponry, even if they weren't meant to actually be explosive? I mean, it just seems so convoluted. That whole plan. Parts of it also that concerned me was sort of like what I would call like the 9/11 porn of it. It was just the whole war on terror side of things. I find a little overused and kind of cheap sometimes when people try to weld that into a story without really deeper consideration. I mean, maybe they had a better plan, but it didn't come across that way when I saw the film. But I don't know. That to me was a misfire, even though it was well made in many ways. And again, I think everyone was committed to making a great film for sure. I just feel like they were maybe trying too hard to chase the nostalgia of The Wrath of Khan and how they knew everyone loved that film. I mean, I think back to Comic-Con many years ago when Bryan Singer, it was after Superman Returns had come out. And at that point, he was planning on doing a sequel to Superman Returns. And his take on it at Comic-Con was, we're going to Wrath of Khan this one, And I think people are just like, they're too addicted to certain sequels like Wrath of Khan, Empire Strikes Back, Aliens. They feel like, that's what we have to emulate, and it usually doesn't turn out as well because those sequels were bold and they took risks and they took chances and they did new things. It seems like everyone's trying to chase the fan love by emulating these other sequels.
I think there's a problem with Hollywood at the moment that they're not willing to take risks, so they're quite happy to make films that emulate other films that they know have done really well in the past. And I don't think it's kind of the fans demanding that they want to see the same stuff. I think it's the studios saying, well, this is what people will go out and see because they've heard of it, but they're not sort of willing to take those risks like they did with like Wrath of Khan and Aliens. And I think a lot of that's to do with the fact that they put so much money into these films, because to think of it, the budgets for Wrath of Khan was less than the motion picture. I'm sure, well, I know the budget probably for Aliens was more than Alien, but probably by not much, not by today's standards. So it was easier to take those risks. And that kind of size budget now is gone. There isn't the mid-range budget, so they're not quite willing to take the risks. So when they put like a 100 million, 150 million into a film, they feel that they have to have something there very recognizable. I mean, just take the Ghostbusters film that just came out. It seemed like they were kind of willing to take chances with that, because from what I've heard, people quite liked the new stuff they brought in, but then they had to bring in the nostalgia for the old film, and that kind of stuff, kind of brought it down. But that's what I've heard. I've not seen it. I don't plan to see it.
You should see it, and you should see it in 3D IMAX, because it's pretty amazing, like the work they did. I mean, whether or not you like the story of the characters, that's, who knows? I came out of it sort of like so on that, but it's a really, I think it's visually, it's a really, it's like a piece of candy, that film. I think why not just check it out?
Yeah, but I'm getting this fatigue of seeing just these old films coming back, and I think the only way to stop them from happening is not to put money to us, not to go and see them in the theatre, not to go out and buy the DVD, because it's just gonna push Hollywood to make more, because they say, well, it made this amount of money, well, surely we should make more of them, because as we know from history is that when things don't work in Hollywood, then they look elsewhere. I mean, take the musicals back in the late 60s. They were flops and they didn't know what to do, and then this independent film called Easy Riders came along, and it was a big hit, and then suddenly they opened their doors. Now, I'm not saying that would happen these days because of budgets, but it would be interesting to see, where they would go if all these sort of remakes suddenly stopped making money.
Really quickly, Steven Spielberg was famously, I should say, quoted recently about the upcoming implosion of Hollywood. Like there's going to be enough big flops in a row that it's going to kind of really do some serious damage, and a lot of people are sort of looking forward to that, because it is sort of like the end of the studio system in the late 50s going into the 60s, and then the rebirth with independent film, as you say, Easy Rider, and then so many other great 70s movies that kind of had this creative renaissance. And I think people are just people who love movies are dying for that new renaissance to happen. But technology has changed, the audience has changed, people's attention spans have changed. So I don't know if whatever is next is going to be as wonderful as the 70s were. But I do think that it'll be interesting to see what Brian Fuller does with Star Trek Discovery with the new TV show.
I'm happy that he's involved very much. And so is Nicholas Meyer, apparently. He and Nicholas Meyer are involved.
Sure. I think that has a chance of really being the bridge between old and new Star Trek fans, but also take it into a whole new direction that is compelling and has great new storytelling that you don't have to worry about recycling old plots or characters or what I hate. I agree with you about the nostalgia thing. I think there's too much nostalgia. There's too much fan service happening. It's what I call Hall H filmmaking because at Comic-Con, Hall H is where the studios bring out their big guns, and usually they have these filmmakers go up on stage and basically pander to the audience to say, look, we're fans too. We're just like you, And half the time that the movies seem like there's no connection at all to what the fans want or even what the material demands, So I would love to see people get away from having to worry about pandering to fans and just be storytellers, tell stories. Like when, going back to let's say, primitive man around the campfire telling stories of the day's hunt. I don't think they stopped every 5 minutes to ask the people listening to the story, hey, what do you think of the story so far? Do you want me to change it? Do you want me to adjust it? Do you want me to tell you the old story again? I think storytellers should be leaders, not followers. And I think there's a lot of following going on these days.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I mean, thanks for getting us back on track, or should I say back on trek, probably there with that. And I agree entirely. I mean, I kind of want to blame Damon Lindelof for Into Darkness, because I heard somewhere that it was him who recommended or told JJ that he should go back to Khan, but I don't know whether that's true. That's just a rumor, and everyone wants to blame Damon Lindelof for something, right? But what one of the things I think would have been really interesting about Star Trek Into Darkness, and I was disappointed that this was only something that lasted a couple of scenes and then they moved on with the Khan story, was I thought the more interesting bit was the beginning of the film, where Pike basically takes the Enterprise away from Kirk for not following the Prime Directive, which, let's be honest, that's what Star Trek's all about, right? And I thought that was really interesting. I thought, this is great when I was watching it, and Kirk got sort of busted and had the Enterprise taken away from him. And I thought that was brilliant. And then, of course, 2 scenes later, it's like, we've got this emergency, going on near Kronos or whatever, and we need your help. Kirk, I'll give you back the Enterprise. And he goes, I think, Spock should probably be my first officer. And there they are into that story. But, as they were sort of taking everything in a different direction, I personally think that could have been an interesting tangent to explore with Kirk and Pike, but it never happened. There you go.
One of the other reasons why I'm not a big fan of Into Darkness was the way people were just killed I thought that wasn't done very well. I thought Pike's death was a very empty death, and that whole weird thing where Spock does the mind meld with him when he's dying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, didn't like that. And also the destruction at the end of San Francisco, with the Dreadnought class crashing into it, was kind of wiped over. I mean, it was like a year later, and it was like, oh, we're now doing this 5-year mission, and nobody ever mentions what happened a year ago and all those deaths. It's just.
Yeah, no, I agree. Of course, the other thing, sorry, I know I said I already had my rant, but there was one little point that I've just remembered that really annoyed me. I said how in the first film, having Nimoy in it was brilliant because he was part of the story and the character. I'm sorry, the ringing up Nimoy to ask him what's going to happen and that ridiculous cameo in this film really pissed me off. And I love to see Nimoy. I mean, another sad loss. Love to see Nimoy in anything normally, but I just felt that was a really weak bit of storytelling in this film. It's like, and not only that, let's call Nimoy and speak to him ship wide. Let's not even go to my personal quarters and have that conversation with him in private. He puts it up on the main view screen, and I just thought, well, and I love there's all those sort of joke videos out there now where he's going, oh yeah, and you might want to get some humpback whales that could be useful, and and all that sort of stuff, which I thought was quite funny, but it annoyed me in the film,
especially when his first lines are, "Well, I did tell you that I couldn't reveal anything about your future, but."
Yeah, having said that,
yes.
I was like, oh come on. What did you think about that bit, Charles? I think you.
You mean the phone a friend from?
Yeah.
It was, again, not the most inspired moment, but again, as you say, it's great to have Nimoy make a moment, like a cameo of sorts. And I thought the way they included Nimoy and beyond was tasteful, and actually that particular moment towards the end where you see the whole old crew was touching. So, but yeah, I think that was not the best. I'll just leave it at that. I just feel like that whole film was all about name checking and riffing and kind of reliving rather than doing something incredibly new.
Yeah.
Another issue I actually have with Into Darkness is, I know there may be some other explanation, but we see Khan in that little ship during the attack at Starfleet. He beams out of that ship as it's crashing, and then the next time we see him, he's beaming on to Kronos. And are they saying that now there's like this, this long distance transporter technology where now you don't even need ships anymore? Just beam your people to wherever they need to go.
Yeah. Well, it was supposed to be what Scotty had done in the first film to get obviously Kirk and himself back to the Enterprise while it was warping, and Spock obviously gave him the equation that he hadn't yet invented, to do that. But then they have some crappy line at the beginning of Into Darkness about how in that secret Starfleet place that Noel Clarke goes to, that they'd actually stolen that technology that Scotty had done for the personal transwarp beaming. But like you said, yes, suddenly you don't need starships anymore because you can beam anywhere with that. You obviously don't have to worry about dying anymore because all you need is a little bit of Khan super blood, and you're back to living again. So it was just it was all that sort of thing just really wound me up. I was like, come on, this is not good.
just as you're saying that, I was remembering the Red Letter Media review for Into Darkness where they said, we would have loved to seen at the end like Khan up, strapped to a machine, and they're just pumping the blood out of him 24, because now they've got the cure, to live forever, or they got the cure for radiation sickness. I'm sure there's always going to be like some caveat that's going to come up in one of the other films. It's like, yes, we do have this miracle blood, but it only works on this.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm forgetting the movie, but all of Khan's people, all 72 of them, they're all genetically engineered, right? I mean, they're all basically human, so they all have the same blood, presumably, right?
Yeah.
So did they actually have to go chasing Khan? I mean, they had to capture him, obviously, but they didn't have to wait for Khan's blood to save Kirk, right? Because it seemed like McCoy was like, you have to bring Khan back alive for the blood. Is that how I?
That's
Yeah,
right.
no,
Yeah,
that's how it was when
Yeah.
they could have just thawed someone else out, right?
I've heard a theory somewhere where they said, well, but see, they had only tried Khan's blood, so that was the only one they were sure that it would work for.
Yeah, but they had a bunch of tribbles laying around. They could have tried it on a tribble.
Yeah.
It was. No, it really didn't tick the box for me. I just felt it wasn't as well thought out, and that bothered me. Whereas I thought that they had done such a good job of thinking through the first film, the reboot film, so that it kind of, on a level, bearing in mind we're talking about sci-fi fiction here, but on a level kind of made sense, and worked. Whereas I didn't feel that with Into Darkness. And I agree with what you were saying, Simon, about all the spectacle of destruction that you had to have at the end, which you seems to be in every Hollywood film or every Hollywood blockbuster that comes out now. You've got to have these scenes of mass destruction everywhere, and it's just like, what?
Yeah. Well, the one thing all three films have is people being blown out into space, and I remember the first time I saw that in Starship Troopers, I thought that was the coolest thing ever. But now, having seen it 3 times in the Star Trek films, I'm kind of, I feel sorry for the poor crew members, because it's like, I wouldn't want to work on that ship because it gets hit and you're blown out. And, I thought that they did it really well in the first one, but then in the second, the third one, it just got, I don't know, it's kind of like you see it too much, and it doesn't have the same effect that it had in those other films.
It also seems like shields don't exist in this post-Kelvin universe, because the Enterprise just gets right off the bat in every single movie just takes serious damage. There's like no moment of like shields down to 70% or 30%. They say those lines, but you don't really feel there are shields actually deflecting fire.
No, especially as you see all these crew members being sucked out into space.
That was, again, something very simplistic in Wrath of Khan that they did very well, I thought, was that simple graphic where when they put the shields up, you see the little formation of dots go around the sort of plan shape of the ship on the display. And I know, very, very basic, but I always thought that was a really good way of communicating how that worked, and like you said, they don't even seem to exist in the new films.
Well, and also to go quickly back to Generations, in the opening of that film, when Enterprise B takes that massive hit to the lower part of the ship, and Kirk gets sucked out into space, and when Scotty and Chekhov go down, to see what happened, there's this massive hole ripped into the ship, but they're perfectly protected because of shields. Shields are keeping them protected. So I don't think shields really have ever played a part in these new movies in a way that I think old time Star Trek fans are used to.
No, there's some changes there for sure, but
saying that, I would say that Star Trek Beyond does a lot to sort of make up for Into Darkness. I have to say, when I sat down to watch Star Trek Beyond, after the Enterprise crashes onto the planet, I had no idea where this was going, and I was actually I was enjoying that because I had no idea what was going to happen.
Yeah, me also. This was one of the ones where I had seen the trailer and I was slightly worried because obviously, as we've made clear, wasn't particularly happy with Into Darkness, and saw the trailer for this and was just a little bit worried. I was like, I don't know. And I agree with you. You sit down to watch it, you don't know where it's going. And I really felt that this did a really good effort of going back and capturing the spirit of the original series. I love the fact that it was, 966 days, which was a little reference to, the 50th anniversary being 966, but, 966 days into its 5-year mission. So we were kind of picking up like, almost 3 years into it. And, you kind of believed that they visited a lot of these planets, and I like the whole Yorktown base, the sort of Dyson Sphere Yorktown base that they go to, and you really got a sense of that world, and much as Gene Roddenberry had always wanted, the federation of all these different planets and cultures together, and for me, this film really sort of ticked a lot of Star Trek boxes, and I know Simon Pegg has taken a lot of credit for that, as he was involved in the writing process on this, and if he indeed did come push for a lot of that stuff, then good on him, I say.
Yeah, I mean, I was also concerned by that very first trailer that used Beastie Boys Sabotage in it, which, strangely enough, in the film I think they used it beautifully. But
yes.
but in the first trailer, it was scary to see Kirk on a motorcycle, and it just seemed so, wow, what we've come so far away from the Star Trek that we thought we knew. But it's interesting because the first two of the as you call the Kelvin universe movies really relied heavily on Earth. Even though they went out for a bit, they still basically come back to Earth. And to me, Star Trek is always about going out there, right? Going beyond. And so it was nice to see in this film that they actually do go beyond, and they go out to other planets. The thing with Yorktown is it's basically another Earth. I mean, it's basically skyscrapers and plazas and fountains and pedestrians walking on streets and things like that. So that I thought was a little bit of a cheat, even though it's a fantastic design and it's visually stunning. It felt a bit of a cheat to me, but it didn't bother me either, because I was having so much fun with how old school the film felt, and I really loved how the characters got divided because of the Enterprise crash. I thought that was really smart. I mean, in a similar way, when The Empire Strikes Back divides Luke and R2 from the rest of the heroes, and they themselves are divided from the Empire invader. It's like, it's kind of nice to see the characters split off, because you get more personal moments with them and you get to learn about them more. And in this case, I thought the Spock McCoy plot was really wonderful for those two characters, because they have such a long history together in the original TV shows and movies, and kind of the love-hate relationship they have really was beautifully, I thought, depicted here. I again, it was sort of like, it's too bad that some of the crew were just basically prisoners trying to get out. It's more of like a POW movie, but ultimately, that the way they came together, I thought, was earned and very well handled. And I do have some questions about Quell and his his whole thing, but other than that, I think it's a pretty solid movie, and definitely a huge step up from Into Darkness.
It's concerning Kroll. I think his reveal, I actually would have liked to have known that a bit sooner, because it had some the fact that, spoilers if you've not seen the film, that he's been abandoned, and from where he's coming from is because of that abandonment. And it would have been interesting more to have known that earlier than, say, sort of near the end.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things they did nicely in this was, much like the first film as well, is in terms of the characters, they the crew characters, that is, they all had their moment. They all had something to do, which was quite nice, even though some of them, as you rightly said, Charles, were just kind of prisoners, but they all got their sort of moment to kick ass or do something cool, which was nice. But I agree with you, Simon, the whole Idris Elba thing, which again, it's funny, we had kind of Sherlock as the villain in the last one, and we got Luther as the villain in this one, which is another great UK show. I mean, I particularly liked the fact that the USS Franklin was kind of a descendant about a decade on from Enterprise, because, as I said, I've already mentioned that I was a fan of Enterprise, even though a lot of Star Trek fans weren't. And I like the fact that they kind of did use a similar design to the NX-01 that they'd had in that show. And again, they were filling in a little bit more of that history that happened between Enterprise and the Kelvin, by having that in there. But yes, it would have definitely given the character a bit more resonance if we'd known a bit more of that sooner, instead of them trying to make it a dramatic reveal later in the movie and in the plot.
Now, am I right in saying that Idris Elba's character was that he had been a warrior in the... Did he say he was a warrior in the Klingon Wars?
No, in the Xindi and in the Romulan Wars. So essentially, when they had Makos on the Enterprise, which are the military, which obviously Star Trek I know is not supposed to be anything to do with military, but in season 3 of Enterprise, they actually, because you've got Starfleet, but you haven't got the United Federation of Planets quite yet. At that point, they're working towards it. And because of the Xindi threat to Earth, which is interesting because that was never been mentioned, that was never mentioned previously, but you had this big war. And they had these commandos on the Enterprise called Makos. And obviously they said that Idris Elba's character quite possibly was one of the younger members on the original Enterprise for that. But they also said that he fought in the Romulan War, which is the thing that takes place sort of between Enterprise and the formation of the United Federation of Planets. It's in that sort of early 2260s. And so I kind of like those little references. For me, the fanboy part of me kind of liked that they sort of tried to tie it in a little bit there.
Yeah, no, I think that was actually, I was kind of surprised that they did that because, as you say, Enterprise is not the most beloved of all the shows, but I thought that was a nice touch, and I'm curious to see how they continue to, track the pre-Kelvin timeline into the post-Kelvin timeline. Because I was just thinking earlier when we were talking about the motion picture, I mean, V'ger is on his way. In the Kelvin timeline, there's no change in that because Voyager 6, I believe it was, went out into space. So V'ger is on its way into the post-Kelvin timeline. So I'm like, okay, are we going to see that at some point? Is that going to be addressed? Because that's a major issue that's going to affect Earth, and I'm not sure this particular crew is ready for it in the way that the other crew was. It's maybe differently ready, but I feel like this crew is more about like, let's blow the shit out of V'ger, rather than talking to it. So who knows? We'll see.
And we also have the probe that wants to talk to Humpback Wells coming.
Right.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, which is almost actually, although tonally a very different film, the actual initial setup at the beginning of Voyage Home was actually quite similar to the motion picture in that respect, with this sort of threat coming to Earth, that they had to do something about. But it is interesting. Again, you've mentioned, and I'm glad you have, Charles. You've talked quite a bit about costumes and uniforms and stuff, and that's always been one of the things about Star Trek that I've always kind of liked in terms of the whole world building of creating that universe. And I kind of like the uniforms that they had which Spock ends up having to wear when his one gets messed up, with his injury. They were kind of a nice little blend, sort of between the uniforms they had in Enterprise and where the uniforms were by the time you'd got to the USS Kelvin, and this kind of again sort of filled a little gap in that whole continuity. And I love it when they do all that sort of stuff, so the geek in me loves all that shit. But yeah, I thought this film was very, very interesting and worked really well. One of the things I did want to mention as well about this, because I like the fact that they didn't make it a thing, is obviously what Roddenberry always wanted about this utopian future was, all the isms were ignored. So, there was no racism, sexism, ageism, all of that stuff was ignored, along with religion and disability and all of that stuff within the United Federation of Planets. But obviously they dealt with the whole sexuality thing as well in this by having Sulu character, giving a bit more sort of backstory to that, even though obviously we knew he had a daughter in Star Trek Generations, but the fact that he was in a same-sex relationship raising that little girl, and what I liked about that is they had it in there without making it a big deal, without making it a big thing. Did you guys, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I was curious by the sort of backlash there was. It may not have been made a thing in the film, but certainly in the public's eye, it was made a thing of. And they said they did it as a nod to George Takei, the fact that he is, gay in real life. And then he came out and said, well, I didn't play Sulu gay. I never saw the character that way. And as much as I'm, flattered that you did this, I also feel that it's not true to Gene Roddenberry's vision of the character.
Interesting.
I found it was that was interesting. I mean, it was made more of a thing than it should have been.
I've noticed the whole LGBT thing in Hollywood at the moment. It seems that every show and every film, definitely every show on television now, whether it's relevant to the plot or not, seems to have to almost like tick that box for some reason. There are some things that it works for because it's absolutely integral to the story and to the characters or whatever. But then there's other things where it just feels like it's been shoehorned in for the sake of it. And I don't know whether it's become sort of some mandate or whatever. But have you noticed that with stuff lately, that everything seems to try and be addressing it somewhere?
Well, I mean, really quickly, I just wanted to say yesterday here at Star Trek 50 here in Vegas, George Takei was on stage, and the question was asked of him, like, now that you've seen Beyond, what do you think of the whole, Sulu is gay controversy? And he maintained the story that, that you guys talked about, which was, that Roddenberry envisioned him as straight and so on and so forth. But he also said, now that you've seen it, it's like, it's not that big of a deal. It's like, it's not even like a moment. It's less than a moment, because you could make an argument that they're not even in a same-sex relationship. It's just, they're like, family or relatives or whatever. It's sure. It's so lightly touched upon. It's not like they kissed, I mean, literally just putting their arm around the other. And it's just like, it's what it should be. It's just family, it's like, not the fact that they're both men makes no difference. There's there to be reunited, which I do think is a strange moment that Enterprise crew have family on Yorktown, wherever that is. It just seems like did they come out to meet them? I kind of missed that plot point, or were they living there? I'm all about like what's true to the characters you're writing and situations you're writing. Changing a character's sexual preference to pay homage to somebody or to be popular is, I don't think that's the way to go. I think the way to go is, who is this character and what is their life, and what is the best way to depict that life, and is it even relevant? And if it is relevant, then embrace it. And I'm not sure that, I think Beyond did a really good job of tiptoeing around it. Like they got their cake and they ate it too. They kind of like said he's gay, but we're not going to throw it in your face, which is, again, it doesn't really matter to me, because if he's gay, he's gay. If he's not, he's not. It's fine either way. Just what does it mean for the story and the characters? That's what's important.
Which is kind of what Roddenberry always said, didn't he? That was one of the things, because he always used to get a load of stick that there wasn't, gay characters or whatever in the universe. And he said, but we're so far in the future, by that point, it doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. And that's what I thought they did kind of well with addressing it, if you even want to put it that way, in this film. It didn't really seem to be a big deal at all. And I thought, I don't really see what you were saying, Simon. I don't really see what all the media backlash and hype was about, really, because so what? It didn't really make a difference, did it?
Well, I think people just want to be offended for being offended's sake. Oh my God, Sulu's gay. Oh no, I must go on the internet and bitch about it.
One thing you have to understand, at least here in the States, and I'm sure you guys are catching parts of it as well, is like we're dealing with Donald Trump. And we're dealing with we're dealing with like our whole political situation right now is just crazy. And fortunately, I think it's stabilizing, and all the nut jobs that came out are starting to go back into the shadows and hiding under the rocks again. But I do think that's the climate right now. There's this heightened sense of political correctness that people seem to be either for or against or whatever, but people seem to want to talk about it. And the fact that Sulu and Star Trek Beyond stepped into that crossfire for about 5 minutes, that became the talk of the day. And now it's over.
I think because we're dealing with a social media generation now, where there's a lot of websites out there, and they need to create traffic, and so they write articles like this and be offended because they know people are going to click on it and they're going to read it. And of course, I think people follow that as well when they're on Twitter and Facebook. I am so offended, Sulu's gay, and it's just like, well,
so what? Yeah.
it's not like there's a scene in the film where Sulu's in bed with a man.
Yeah.
There's nothing to be offended by. It's like if they are a couple, they're a loving couple who's raising a child. And what is wrong with that? Does it matter what their sexuality is?
No. And by the way, it's probably even more offensive to see Carol Marcus in her underwear. Which I don't. Yeah. By the way, I'm perfectly happy to enjoy that, but I'm just saying it's like that to me is more just exploitative of the character.
Yeah.
Yes. And that just brings me to my next point, was what happened to Dr. Marcus? Because she was a part of the crew at the end of Into Darkness, and then nowhere to be seen in Beyond.
Kirk knocked her up, and she's gone off to Regular One to try and deal with world population problems and create a new planet out of something lifelessness. Oh, weird. Where's that going?
You know what? That is the best answer I've heard to that question.
Yeah, Kirk is just doing what she wanted. He stayed away. Like that's
exactly.
Perfect too. He stayed away. Did what he wanted. I stayed away.
Indeed. Oh, one of the things I loved as well, talking to stuff, is when they're saying about it's just approaching Kirk's 30th birthday, and he obviously outlived his dad and all this sort of stuff. But I like the toast at the end where he goes, "Here's to perfect eyesight and a full head of hair." I thought that was brilliant. But yes, no Alice Eve in this film.
Yeah, I mean, there was also didn't they make a toast to absent friends as well? Poignant.
Yes.
Very poignant.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, it's that the thing with Anton Yeltsin is tragic, because he was only 27. I'd just seen recently as well, I don't know whether you've seen it, Green Room. In fact, there is a Star Trek connection there as well, because Patrick Stewart's in it, isn't he? Which was fantastic, and he was great. This guy sort of had everything going for him, into unfortunately, be involved in such a tragic accident like that is I'm so glad they put the dedication to both Nimoy and him at the end of the film. I think that was very respectfully handled, and also apparently, and I'm liking this. JJ has announced that they will not be recasting Pavel Chekhov for future films. So kind of full circle, I guess it's going to go back to what you mentioned at the beginning, Charles, about the animated series, because of course the animated series did not actually have Chekhov in it, did it?
That's right, because they didn't want to pay to have the entire cast back. So they lost one of them basically, which makes no sense. But I'll be curious to see how they deal with that. I'm sure he'll either be away on another assignment, or maybe they'll work his passing into it somehow. Who knows? I'm glad they're not going to recast it. Just I wonder if the next one's going to be the final one for this particular cast, because I'm not sure how much longer they can go if they don't address where Chekhov is. I mean, it's like was it Insurrection where Worf just kind of showed up for the wedding, like randomly from Deep Space Nine? It was kind of like Worf just happens to be in town and he's going to join him on this adventure. Was that how that worked on
it? Was, yeah.
Yeah, I think that worked on both films. I think he sort of turned up for actually 3 of the films, because First Contact he was on the Defiant,
which worked. Right. That made sense. You see, it made sense in the first film, but the 2 that followed, it really didn't. And Michael Dorn did very well out of that whole franchise, really, didn't he, to get included in all this stuff. But it made sense in First Contact, because obviously they were sending all the ships to to fight the Borg, and of course that's what the Defiant had been designed for in the first place, right? Was to battle the Borg. So that in that film it made total sense. But in the other films, Worf suddenly showing up was kind of like just a convenient way of getting the character in there, which was always a bit weak, I thought. But
so this will have to be the opposite of that, is almost as if they made a Deep Space Nine movie, but then Worf disappeared because he had to go to help the Enterprise. So it's kind of like Chekhov will have to have disappeared, some other mission.
Yeah.
We'll sort of finish now, but just summing up our thoughts about where we think where this series is gonna go. But I would like to see the Klingons play a bigger part in this series, because so far they were cut out of the first film and they played a very minor part in the second film. And actually, I would like to see the Klingons be the villain of one of the films coming up.
I guess. I mean, I got to be honest. I didn't really fall in love with the new Klingon look, even though it's not radically different. I'm not in love with the new Klingons. But if they can find a way to develop them and make them more interesting, that'd be great. I'd love to see the notion of a Klingon component in the new film would be great. I just wonder, since it presumably will have some sort of time traveling going on, what will be the catalyst for that? Will it be to avert a war, or change something in history, or to I'm just curious how that's going to work. I think I can't. I'm not going to like repeat it because I'll blow it. But I remember. I don't know if you guys know Devin Faraci. He writes for Birth Movies Death.
Oh right, yes.
He had a really interesting theory about the time mechanics of the next film, which would bring George Kirk back to see his son James Kirk, would somehow end with having to erase this new alternate timeline. So basically the timeline would now be healed and go back to the prime timeline again once and for all, but this current alternate timeline would have to be erased for that. And then it's like James Kirk, will have to make the sacrifice that his father did and kind of bring it full circle. I don't know if I'm getting that right, but I think that's the gist of what Devin was saying. I think that could be a really interesting way to go if they decide this next movie is the final one for this cast.
Yeah, that would certainly be a way to end it.
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting, and this is the thing. I mean, Star Trek's always dealt with time travel, even though it seems to have dealt with it in different ways throughout the sort of history of Trek. But it will be interesting to see what they do. I mean, one of the things I'm quite interested to find out more about, and I'm not sure this new show that Brian Fuller, I love Brian Fuller because I think he did a fantastic job on the Hannibal TV series, which sadly got cancelled. But and obviously he'd done some work on Trek earlier in his career. He'd written for episodes of Voyager and I believe some Deep Space Nine as well, perhaps. But obviously got him doing this new series. Is it called Star Trek Discovery?
It is,
Discovery. Yeah. I mean, I obviously there's not much detail out there about it yet, but I'm not sure if which era that takes place in, and whether it's in the primary timeline or the Kelvinverse timeline, and whether it's after the next gen, or whether it's before Enterprise. Or I don't really know where it's sort of taken place, but I don't know where they end up going with that is also. As they're trying to do with the franchise, tie everything in. I don't know whether the next film will have anything to do with that. Who knows? It would be interesting. I'm looking forward to it, whatever happens.
Well, I suppose the great thing is that it doesn't have to even be slaved to the post-Kelvin timeline. They can go back into it can be post-Kelvin in the timeline, in the overall timeline, but it doesn't have to follow that alternate reality. It can be
in the primary timeline,
right? It can be post-Kelvin but primary timeline, without the Narada having changed time or whatever. So I get the feeling it's going to be that, but I don't know for sure. I have to say I'm very intrigued by the design of the Discovery, being based on Ralph McQuarrie design for I think it was called Planet of the Titans. It was one of the earlier attempts at getting Star Trek into going beyond the original series. And,
phase 2, wasn't it? Of Star Trek phase 2 or whatever.
I think there are a variety of attempts to move beyond the original series, and so this is one of the old designs of the new quote unquote new Enterprise from way back then. So it's kind of nice that they brought that back. I think it's kind of an interesting design, this ship.
Yeah, I mean, as I said to you, Keith, the back of it looks like an old Klingon cruiser from the motion picture.
Yes, it does a bit. Yeah. Yeah, who knows? it's interesting to see where it goes. I'm kind of, I'm just excited that I was, when they cancelled Enterprise back in 2004, 2005, whenever it was, and obviously I know it was only a few years till we got the reboot Star Trek, but it was the first time in something like 19 years that there hadn't been any Star Trek on television, and even longer, that there hadn't been any movies and stuff. And I was kind of sad because, big fan of it. So I'm quite excited by the fact that we now got, not only at least one more movie, if not more movies to look forward to, but we've also got a television series too. And I guess there's a lot of talk about this at the very event that you're at, Charles. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I have to say that probably say 90% of this celebration here is about the past of Star Trek. It's all about celebrating the different types of fandom within the Star Trek community, but there definitely seems to be a lot of curiosity and excitement about where it's going next, especially with Discovery. I think that because that's the clearest next step, and I think people are excited about that. But I think most people here are basically here to just kind of celebrate what tiny little kind of like back alley of Star Trek they particularly like. There's a lot of like niche, really obscure reference type costuming going on and cosplay happening. It's fun. It's a lot of fun to see people like embrace a random character from one episode and like that's their cosplay. It's kind of funny to see people really go that deep.
Cool. And we're going to see Discovery obviously late this year to sort of still correspond with the 50th anniversary, are we? Or is it planned for early next year?
I gotta be honest, I don't remember what the date was, if it was late this year or early next. I get the feeling it's early next, but I could be wrong about that. Maybe it is. Maybe you're right. Maybe it is to take advantage of the anniversary later this year.
I think I heard it was going to be next year as well.
Fair enough. Well, as long as it's good, that's all that matters, isn't it? So, yeah.
Yeah.
And the people involved, I mean, the fact they've got Nick Meyer involved as well as Brian Fuller on this, I think is good, because obviously Nick Meyer's contribution to the Star Trek franchise, with what he did in Star Trek 2 and 6, and obviously some of his writing duties on Star Trek 4, I think he's a very sort of switched on and creative guy to have involved in it. So I'm pleased to hear that.
I think it'll be a great combination because Brian Fuller being not just a great, writer producer, but also a fan, and Nicholas Meyer being a writer producer but not a fan. That balance will be really healthy, for storytelling.
Yeah, it'll be that whole. JJ said he was sort of sat between Brian Burke, who wasn't a fan, and obviously Archie and Kurtzman, who were massive fans. So he kind of had, he could bounce it off each of them so that it would tick the boxes as far as the fans were concerned, but also somebody new to the franchise, like you said, taking your girlfriend, for example, to it. It would work for them as well. And I think that's really cool when it works that way. Yeah.
I think that's a good place to end it.
Indeed.
So Charles, where can we find more of your work?
I guess you could probably just look me up on IMDb, and then maybe from that go to Amazon or whatever else you want to go if you like any of the stuff you see listed on IMDb. But I'm not a big salesman for my own work. It's weird. It's like I am happy to talk about my work and happy to talk about other people's work, but when it comes to like telling you how to find my stuff, I don't know. Just go online and find me.
And do you have a Facebook fan page or anything?
I don't know. I don't know if I have one of those, but if anyone wants to find me on Facebook and friend me, that's fine. I'm on Twitter, which is at Lauzirika, which is my last name, and same on Instagram. And that's kind of my social media presence at the moment.
And Keith, where can we find your work?
Yeah, you go to YouTube and put in British Isles, spelled Eyles. There's a show reel and some short films on there. Feel free to comment, share, whatever. But you can get in touch that way for sure.
And as always, you can find my work on independentrunnings.com. You can find this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and all good podcast providers. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Movie Heaven, Movie Hell. And if you're on iTunes and Stitcher, please leave us a rating and a review. Well, that just leaves us to say thank you to you, Charles, for coming on and talking Trek with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm about to go downstairs and see William Shatner.
I'm so envious. Yes, enjoy the rest of your time at the Trek celebration there in Las Vegas. And it's just been a real pleasure to have you back on the show again. We really, really appreciate your time. So have fun.
Yes, enjoy.
Thanks. Live long and prosper.
Hey, there you go. Perfect. Okay, beam me up, Scotty.
And let us go where no person has gone before, because you can't say no man anymore.
No one. Indeed.
Well, thank you to you, listener, for listening, and join us again for the next episode of Movie Heaven, Movie Hell, where we delve into the next generation movies.